Ladies and gentlemen, as we move into our first session, we return to the battlefield itself. 1965 as a turning point. This discussion will cover the national consensus on defense, lessons from Korea, the decision to cross the border, and India's counteroffensive. To moderate this session, may I please invite Mr. Sandeep Unnithan, Editor-in-Chief, Chakra News. On the panel, we have Lieutenant General Dr. Rakesh Sharma, Distinguished Fellow VIF, Major Probal Das Gupta, Mr. Uttam Sinha, Senior Fellow MP IDSA. May we please welcome our panelists with a round of applause.
Hello, good morning. It's a hard act to catch up with what once Major Billy Bedi has spoken. It's very difficult for us to kind of keep up with that, but I think we'll talk about the 1965 war from it being a turning point. And you know, the 1965 war is a forgotten war in a lot of senses, because it came between the 1962 war, which was a shock to the system, and between 1971, a few years later, which was, I mean, it's a historic victory. I mean, strategic victory. It's one of the first of its kind post the Second World War. So 65 was somewhere in between. It was like a semi-final of sorts. But you see a lot of contours emerging from 65, which are relevant even today in 2025. And the first common factor to 65 and 2025, as a lot of you would be aware, is the Field Marshal. You had Field Marshal Ayub then, you have Field Marshal Asim Munir today during Operation Sindoor. And I've always maintained that there's a long line of generals in Pakistan who all think that they are God's gift to Pakistan's problems. And they leave Pakistan in a worse condition than when they take it over. And this is exactly what happens in 1965 as well. You have Field Marshal Ayub Khan, who sees a window of opportunity and he seizes it. And there's a slow build-up. There are three phases to this war. 1965 starts with the run of Kutch in April. And then it goes on to Gibraltar, then Grand Slam, and of course, the ceasefire, which ends in a strategic defeat for Pakistan. And we'll come to the reasons for that. But I want to start, of course, I have a very distinguished panel here. There's General Rakesh Sharma, there's Probal Das Gupta, and Uttam Sinha, who's a scholar. Very distinguished panel. We'll go through the reasons why 65 was such a big turning point. But before I start, sir, both of you are from the same regiment, right? The 11 battalion, yeah, the same battalion, 11 Gorkha. And quick question, why are Gorkha chiefs of defense staff and Gorkha strategic thinkers, why are they like scissors? 11 GR, yes. Why are they like scissors? They always come in pairs. But, you know, General Sharma, I want to start by asking you this. We heard Major Bedi talk about, you know, Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir, but I want to take your thoughts to April of 1965, thousands of kilometers south in the desert. Field Marshal Ayub launches Operation Desert Hawk. Was that the Kargil War of 1965? Was this the operation that we should have responded to more aggressively, and possibly what unfolded a few months later would have been very different?
Thank you, Sandeep, and thank you, organizers, for inviting me. It was great listening to the first session. General AK sitting here commanded a brigade in Bhuj. So first is that. The fact of the matter is...
also from the Gorkhas.
He's also from 11 GR.
11 GR, right.
And so is...
Let's hear it for the 11 GR.
So is Major Dalbir here, and so is that young lady who's sitting in greens.
Right.
Okay. Now, the fact is, you know, when did the war start? You know, if it was this year, we wouldn't have said war started on, say, 3rd or 6th of September. Right. That it would have been a wrong nomenclature to call this a war. The war started on 1st of January, if not earlier.
65.
In 65. And that's the way wars are fought. The wars, they would be lull in between. There would be hectic activity in other times. We did fantastic operations before the actual start of the war. So you can't say the war started on 6th of September. That's a absolutely wrong nomenclature. In fact, India doesn't say so. Pakistan celebrates it that way. Second is the issue of Kutch. Kutch happened firstly in 1956. In fact, 1935, when the presidencies were formed, the 1935 Act, which decided the boundary between Kutch and Sindh, is the one when issue started. And it is like, China border, 19th century. Right. These are borders which are, carried away in that manner. So 1956 was the first time one of our Grenadiers unit which went across to one of these places. See, fortunately on the Pakistani side, the roads are well developed. They were well developed then. Up to Madin they had a road. Karachi was only 130 kilometers away from the border. They had a road right up to the borders. We had nothing. We had no roads. We had no border security force. We had no CRPF also at that time. It was Gujarat Police, one unit located at Bhuj. So, I think we had taken the area of Kutch relatively lightly because for some part of the year it gets flooded and it's in bad shape. So the Pakistanis were aware of it and they had planned it, and they did this in 1956. They captured it. One of our cavalry units, horse units, which went across to that area was finally killed. Even the camels were killed in 1956. So it's been happening. Kutch was always a problem area for quite some time. On 1st of January, it was pre-decided. 1st of January is just when the elections were just over, not our elections. Fatima Jinnah had stood for elections against Ayub Khan, and she would have won hands down in the elections in 64. And he was in a problem situation. It was totally a rigged election. She lost by 10,000 votes. She was having major crowds across in East Pakistan and also West Pakistan. So he was in a dire strait. It is that story comes up. Anytime Pakistan becomes in a dire state internally, the best is to start an Indian bogey so that it brings about nationalism in that country.
Right. So the field marshal there was under threat from
so
the politicians.
Yes.
The civilians.
Yeah, so he had to, and as you saw after 65 war, he lasted just about a year and a half and he was thrown away. So the fact, when he started the Kutch operation, he knew that we had no reaction. We had one brigade located at Dharangadra, which is in Gujarat, and we moved them also quite late. So the fact is that he tried it, and we had no way to respond. So why do you say that in retrospective we can have accusing fingers to say that Gujarat Police Party was the first one which landed up there without tracks and roads, and found that Pakistanis were already had a road inside Kutch, good about 3-4 kilometers.
It was an infantry division that had moved
in so they had
armor.
8 infantry division and 2 armored regiments with them, with Shafis, and they were located at Karachi, and 8 division was moved forward already, and we had no armor. Nothing at all. So the fact is that, we were, by the time we found out, it was just too late. So they were already in Kanjal Court. They had run over the Sardar post, and they had 3 pincer movement inside Kutch. So when you see the kind of operation, and I would take a step back here. While we talk a lot about ourselves, we must allow the enemy also a vote in a war. Right. So when we discuss future Chamjauria or any other areas, the enemy, Pakistanis, showed good brilliance in many of the operations. So we must accept.
Brilliant.
Very brilliant.
Strategically flawed.
Yeah, okay, strategically flawed, but tactically, operationally, they did a very fine job in ways. So did they in Kutch. By the time we responded back, in April, and by the time it came up the end of April when Mr. Wilson got involved, the UK Prime Minister got involved, we had actually lost out substantial territory in Kutch. And we had, of course, moved a brigade and a half later, but it was insufficient force for such a vast area as the run of Kutch.
Yeah, it's about 28,000 square kilometers, which is almost 23,000. It's almost the state of Kerala. It's as big as Kerala almost.
Okay.
My home state.
My home state, na? So examples are home state. Okay.
Right. So, but very quickly, Prabal, if we had neutralized that probe. I mean, this was a classic probing operation, what you
Yes.
study in the military and what you, of course, execute as well. If India had kind of reacted more offensively towards that and kind of, met force on force, force with force, do you think the Pakistanis would have altered their plan for Grand Slam? Because it was like a sequential kind of operation. First you had Kutch in April when you come in with a division backed with armor, and then you have Grand Slam, Gibraltar after that in Jammu and Kashmir, and then you have Grand Slam.
Yeah.
So it was a sequential kind of an operation, right? But if we had put a halt to it in Kutch, do you think that the outcome of this would have been different? Would they have, because you were mentioning to me how Ayub had planned this for 1966.
Yes, yes. No, so thank you, Sandeep, for this question. Well, for India, Kutch was the right enemy, the wrong place, and possibly not the most desirable outcome. For Pakistan, it was the wrong enemy, right place, and their takeaway was a misleading one, which is where they started thinking that, look, for phase 2 and phase 3, which is Gibraltar and Grand Slam, they're going to hold an advantage over India because India was not aggressive enough. And like General Rakesh mentioned, we must give credit to the enemy there. But I think in Kutch, it was also a case of, who was making the lesser mistakes, For instance, the Pakistanis didn't drive home the advantage of, attack on the Sardar post, which India had held, albeit it was not the best of locations. So, and also what had happened was then you had an officiating brigade commander, then Colonel Sundarji, who had recceed the area, disguised as a local police officer, and he had recommended the occupation of, he'd recommended the attack on Kanjar Court, which the Pakistanis had occupied. And this was at a height, this is a series of dilapidated forts, which gave them, an advantage over the lower lying areas. So he had recommended that Kanjar Court be captured, which was not agreed to. And we made mistakes because the commander, 31 Brigadier Pelajani, did not go through with the decision to do that. And we held Sardar Post, and we were on the defensive, which gave different indications to the Pakistanis. Now, to your question about, so yes, if India had showed a greater decisiveness in Kutch, it could have been different elsewhere. Now, to your point about 1966, so what had happened was, in that period before 1965, Pakistan was actually the original Asian economic tiger, recording, like you said, 6.8% growth. Fastest growing economy at that point of time. And also, after General Ayub had taken over, Field Marshal Ayub, and he had initiated a set of, so it was, as a martial law dictator, is easier to railroad an economy and run it more efficiently, so, which he had done at that time, to his credit. And, the Pakistani, defense expenditure per GNP, per GDP was much higher than India, about 5.6%. So India, from 1962, which is about 2.3 to 2.4% of the GNP, had grown to about 5% by 1965, which had kind of given indications to Pakistan that India was actually beefing up its military capability, which it did in the period from 1962 to 65, because it had signed the defense treaty with the Soviet Union, and the MiGs were brought in. They were not operationalized at that time. There were also weapons and armaments brought in from the US and other places, and India had raised additional divisions, which had actually spooked Ayub. And so we talk about two-front war now. The original two-front war was thought about then, because Ayub had, had connived with the Chinese, and the Chinese had told Sheikh Abdullah in Algiers that they were going to have move the Chinese forces to Sikkim, and Pakistan would come into Kashmir, and they would get India to barter Sikkim for Kashmir. So that was the plan, which the CIA also knew in Langley. But this plan was for 1966 September, why it was brought forward was because Ayub thought that, look, India is going to beef up, and India is going to be a very difficult proposition by 1966. This was a good time. There were political changes. Pandit Nehru had passed away. Lal Bahadur Shastri was a new prime minister. India was going through a famine, was going through economic difficulties. So all of these things together made for a good war with a favorable ending for Pakistan. And they wanted a short war, which is what Ayub wanted at that point. And therefore, the plan for 1965, I would think, is that, how, if I were to put it in one sentence, it was, the plan was intricate, the execution was expansive, and the ambition was grand. That's how Pakistan.
Like all Pakistani military dictators' plans, and as General Rakesh just mentioned, that the enemy, in this case us, also had a vote in this. So I think things didn't go out as per plan. But Uttam, there was something else that started taking shape in 1965. In fact, in March of 1963 itself, you saw the Shakskam Valley being transferred, almost unprecedented, where Pakistan transfers that massive tract of land to China. Could you tell us about how what we take today for granted, the Chipak nexus, how it actually began taking shape in 1963, and why it didn't actually come to fruition in 1965?
Well, thank you. Thank you, the organizers. I think being from a family of soldiers, it's very emotional to be here amongst you all and listen to the escapades of the 1965 war. I have looked at the 65 war, examining the circumstances, the situations, and the context in which it was shaped. I think one of the important and striking context has been what you described was the early formation of China-Pakistan axis. And in fact, it goes a little earlier to 1954, when Nehru visits China and meets Mao. And he's there for about 3 days, and he has an almost 4 hours conversation with Mao. Mao is misleading Nehru in several directions. He's talking about peace and coexistence. He's talking about the Asian solidarity. He's talking about how we can come together to stop Western imperialism, the neo-colonialism that was building up. And while he was talking this with Nehru, the back of his mind, he had Akshay Chin. And Nehru comes back feeling quite elated that he's managed to strike a good cordial relationship with Mao, but Mao has several other plans up his sleeves, and Akshay Chin being one of them, building the roads, etc. The 62 war, and Ayub is thinking a little further ahead. The 62 war, India being defeated, of course the soldiers' morale was very high. Our intelligence assessment was rather poor. I think Ayub quickly thought that this formation with China would be a very important strategic alliance that will sort of counter India in the future. And therefore the 1963 provisional border agreement, in which he gives away the Saksam Valley to China, is an important concession. And Ayub says in his diary, in his autobiography, that we have purchased friendship with China by giving away the Saksam Valley. Nehru, when signing the Indus Waters Treaty in 1960, which is again a very important part of the circumstances that develops during the time, says, we purchased peace with Pakistan. So it's a very interesting contrast, purchasing peace with Pakistan and purchasing friendship, that Ayub said, with China. And giving away Saksam Valley also reflects a strategic bent of mind that Mao had. Saksam Valley and the territory around it meant that China were in control of the rivers. And rivers were very strategic to China. These rivers eventually moved northward to Xinjiang. And these rivers could bring fertility and water and improve the agricultural content of that region. So I think this externality that was shaping up, and I think to me, it is an initial start of the China-Pakistan axis. I think that is, I think, a striking element as how eventually the 1964 war comes. 1965 war is Ayub's war. It's Ayub's war because he's ambitious, he's confident with the kind of armament that he's got from the Americans. And that is why he says, I will stroll to Delhi and have lunch in Red Fort, to which, of course, Lal Bahadur Shastri at the Ram Leela ground, after the ceasefire is signed on September 26th, said, we stopped the pain of coming to Delhi and we thought we'll go to Lahore and receive Ayub. So, it's a very interesting way the dynamics was operating. It was Ayub's war and it was masterminded by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And I think Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, of course, doesn't reveal that he's planned the phases of this war, starting with the infiltration and then the Grand Slam, etc. But when he leaves Ayub's cabinet soon after the ceasefire in October, I think 1965, he does claim to the public the folly of the plan, because he obviously has political ambitions. And the following year, he forms the People's Party, the PPP, and 6 years later, history is told. So I think all these elements do form how we look at 1965. But there's one important aspect I would like to stress here, and I think it's the political leadership of Shastri, Lal Bahadur Shastri. There are two elements of this. One is to bring in a political consensus and an alignment with public opinion. This is something that leaders will have to strive for when in times of war in particular, I think. And Shastri did it masterfully. He was virtually a no one who became the prime minister. And when Nehru died, Ayub refused. He didn't come to India and said, whom am I going to talk to? Such was his attitude towards arrogance and his sort of, And it's very interesting because when Nehru goes to Karachi to sign the Indus Waters Treaty, he tells his members in the parliament that, who am I going to talk to in Pakistan? Because every year there's a change of regime, So these things are very interesting when you look back in history. But this ability to bring in the political consensus, even the Communist Party leaders were part of the discussions, that they were in favor of the 1965 war. The RSS chief, the Sarsang Chalak, MS Golwalkar, he was also part of the discussion. And this ability that Shastri had to bring people together from various spectrums was a remarkable ability.
Absolutely. So, very important points there, Uttam. The fact that the CHIPAC relationship, the China-Pakistan nexus, had begun to take shape. I'm going to, of course, ask Prabal about why it didn't actually have any impact on the ground. But before that, I want to ask General Rakesh Sharma about the battles that actually unfolded in 65. You had Grand Slam. The first time that you had Indian armor, Indian Air Force in contact with the Pakistan Air Force, Indian armor fighting Pakistani armor. And of course, like Uttam mentioned, it was that rush, that sugar rush of American arms that kind of, gave Pakistan's dictator the idea that he could actually overwhelm India. And that's a recurring trait. We've seen that, every couple of years in Pakistan. But tell us, General Sharma, about what is the turning point? Which of those battles, to your mind, to your appreciation, was the turning point in 1965, after which it was more or less certain that Pakistan's strategic objectives would not be met?
Okay, interesting. The certain issues I wish to raise, Paddy. Now, the fact is that in the month of May, we captured, firstly, there is a thing that comes out from 1965 to 2025, is the pathological hatred that the Pakistan army has against us. And whatever we might do, we might land up for marriages or we might take a bus across there. This pathological hatred doesn't go away because that's the binding factor for Pakistan as a nation.
You're talking about the religion, the religious hatred.
So, no, that and of course J&K issue or Indian per se, anti-Indianness per se, with due respects to the ex-ambassadors there. Okay. Now, the second part of the thing is that there is we came under undue pressure from United Nations at that time. We captured a peak called 13,620 in the month of May that is not part of the war. Nobody talks about 13620. 13620 was a peak right on top of the Kargil township, and it was dominating the entire road. And they were making life hell for us. It was an independent decision taken by General Harbaksh and by the brigade commander, 4 Rajput. We went and captured 2 points on 13620, and we cleared it out so that the road was usable. But the fact of the matter is that we came under pressure from Youth Hunt, who criticized us openly in the United Nations, saying that Indians are the aggressors, having forgotten what happened in Kutch, having forgotten anything else, and he said, you withdraw. And we withdrew. On 30th of June, we withdrew, left the 13620. Though United Nations, it was promised that Pakistans won't trouble you on the road to Leh. 15 days thereafter, they again started firing against us. So we were goody-goody in United Nations, and the same peak was captured by us again after 2 months, in the month of August, 13620, because we just could not move anything on the road to Leh. And you know, this time 4 Rajput had moved away, there was another unit came in, and they went and captured it. So, you know, we being foolish. And in Tashkent, we handed over the peak back to them. I mean, come on, we need to, apne girban mein jhaakne ki zarurat hai na. Why were we doing all this here? In 1971, wisdom prevailed. We captured that peak, one of our units, 11th year again, with due respect.
Right, of course.
211, they captured the peak, and General Bhagat, in his wisdom, in Suchetgarh, refused to hand over. He said, "Jo karna nahi dunga main. 13, 16, 20 nahi dunga." We lost Chamb in Diu. We lost Chamb as a place across Manavar Tavi, but we did not leave 13, 620. But in 65 war, we captured it once. We had casualties. Tough capturing it. We captured it again, and to ask me now, see, I have due respects to Lahore. My parents come from that place. But I think what we did in Hajipir was superlative. It brought us to Kargil War, 1999. It's brought us to 2020 when the Chinese came. Because, you know, lo and behold, the wars in the super high altitude have continued over a period of history. So what we did in Hajipir was not capture of Hajipir alone. Hajipur, Bidori, Ledwali Gali, Sarsang, all those features, superlative job. But climbing from Punch upwards, we linked up with Hajipur offensive and captured Kahuta. And Kahuta today is the uranium enrichment area for Pakistanis. Right. So the fact is, when you say what was the, if we say 1940 square kilometers were captured by India in that war, substantial area was captured in this, in Hajipir, the entire bulge. Right. So Grand Slam, if it failed, or sorry, Gibraltar, if it failed, was what we did in Hajipir and cut off the entire area away from the Gulmarg and Uri and Rampur and Punch and Rajouri. All these areas were protected, and you know, all these people who had infiltrated, 8,000 of them, 8,000 people had infiltrated from one end to other end. You know, we were able to sort out because we took over a substantial portion of that area. So that was a critical issue. Sorry, sir? Okay, Operation Bakshi. When north it was called Operation Bakshi Hajipir, and the south it was called Operation Folad. When okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, honored, sir. Okay. Now, so that's one issue here. And the second is that what we planned in Lahore and what we planned in Chakragarh, between 11 Corps and 1 Corps. Chakragarh, which is Sialkot, both were bold, audacious operations, but we were actually not visibly ready for it. That's why they were serious decisions. If you read what General Harbaksh writes, he denigrates formations. He himself says, this formation was not good, this formation was not good. He writes about brigades saying they are not good, and they didn't respond. And then General Naranjan, who was sacked in 62 war, was brought into, the same division was brought into 15 for the same war, sacked again. And he had a complaint, you know, I have handled complaints of the Indian Army. His complaint also Pakistanis found and broadcasted across there. And showed his complaint, his statutory complaint as to why he was removed from command in 1962. Right. So the fact is, I think Hajipir is predates the war, was the Haji Pir and Raja Rani from Punch side, and right up to Kahuta, which is touching Murray. Some of you know Murray is a hill station. We were touching Murray. I mean, we had changed the character of the entire line of control in case we had not handed over that substantial area back to them.
No, I can see why there was so much of
And
angst.
Kargil. And see, so we learnt in 13620 twice, and Haji Pir peaks, and you know Pir Kanti, which we captured in 1948, which is also that high peak. So the mountain warfare that we learnt in these 2-3 operations stood us in that stead in Kargil wars, and it stood us in now 2020 when we did mirror deployment across into Ladakh. Also did the operation in 29th, 30th of August at those heights in Razangla, Rachangla, Magar Hill, Gurung Hill, which occupied all that learned.
Snow leopard.
Snow leopard. We learnt in that operation.
Right.
So.
Very interesting. And you know, General Sharma, when you said that, I mean, I kind of now understand why there was so much of angst in 1966 when you just handed all those territories back to Pakistan.
And you see the movie, sir? The Lal Bahadur Shastri movie. Sir has written a book, I read the book. But the movie, unfortunately, the lead up to discussions that take place at in Shimla agreement or in the Tashkent agreement are not available for read through as to why, what happened.
Why we decided to give it back.
So why all that is conjecturing.
Right, absolutely. And that's the bane of historians in India especially. But you know, Prabal, you're a historian yourself. You've written that very fine book on the 1967 war. We were talking about China, right? This Chipak nexus which began to take shape over there. The Chinese didn't do anything in 65. They just allowed Ayub to be hammered by the Indian military. We fought him to a stalemate. Why did the Chinese not move in? Did they promise to move in the north to distract Indian forces? There was that complaint that they'd lodged, what? Yes. 500 sheep and 89 yaks was stolen by India.
Yeah, in Sikkim.
Yeah, please continue.
So, you know, I'll take a step back. If you look at Operation Gibraltar, there were 8 groups, about 30,000, you know, armed militia that were
irregular forces.
Irregular forces that were unleashed into Kashmir through several points. General Rakesh spoke about Haji Pir, and you know, one of those places I think also was one of those ingress routes of these militants. Then, so they had come in, and they were all named after Islamic invaders of the past. You know, all of them were there. But they were, so Gibraltar, the name comes from a 12th century, you know, operation launched from Gibraltar into Iberia, which is current Spain and Portugal. So it had a historical precedent. However, this whole idea, I mean, see, Ayub and Bhutto thought of, you know, they had this notion about civilizational supremacy, that look, we would, you know, blow away the Indians, blow away a Hindu-dominated army, which they were incorrect about. But the whole idea of unleashing this was also a Chinese-propelled thought, that, you know, look, this is what you could do, because here was civilizational supremacy meeting civilizational war, because they had come from that long march idea. They wanted a long war of attrition, which Ayub was not ready for. He wanted a short war. Now, so this is how the Chinese had an impact on the ground, because they had Chinese weapons carrying into Kashmir, small arms, but they were not well trained, and they were not committed. The local population didn't support them, so Gibraltar failed. Now, China was actually conniving with Pakistan to do this, because this was a very, like I said, it was a very elaborate plan, and 65 is the only war that went on for an entire year. You look at 71, 13-day war. You look at 62, India-China was a different October, November.
71 was a little longer than 13 days. We don't admit it officially.
Yes, yes, it is. Yeah. If you take into account,
it's 13.
Yes, Battle of Boira and several other things, so it starts from November. Yet this was 3 phases, full war, full year. It had the stamp of the Chinese. they were behind. They were also conniving, planning in this entire. They designed this. Also, China and Pakistan had planned this much earlier. The idea, like you said, the Chinese. If you look at the date line, for instance, after Operation Gibraltar failed, Pakistan launched Operation Grand Slam because the Haji Pir operation was successful and they had suffered a setback. So but they were ready. They were ready and they surprised us at Chamjoriya. So they did that. The Chinese actually, if you look at the date line, the Chinese declared the Tibet Autonomous Region on the 1st of September. And they moved their forces up to Sikkim. So what had happened was the Chinese and the Pakistanis had decided earlier that they would make India deploy on two fronts, on the western front and the northern front, which is the Pakistani army, and the eastern front, wherein opposite Sikkim, the Chinese would deploy. And the idea was to, like I said, the Pakistani forces move into Kashmir, and the Chamjoriya axis was something that they relied heavily on, and they were sure India was not prepared, which we were not. And so if they had moved in, they would have exploited their gains, they would have taken Jammu, they would have dictated terms, the Chinese would have moved into Gangtok. Now this was a war game being played in Langley in February 1965, under one of the foundations there under the blessings of the CIA. And so Zhou Enlai had actually mentioned this to Sheikh Abdullah, that this is the plan, and he had said that in Algiers. Sheikh Abdullah had, in his later interview, he said that he had actually shared this plan with the government of India, but nobody took cognizance of it. I don't know who's speaking the truth, but this is what had happened then. The fact of the matter is that Pakistanis did not progress in their plans, and the Chinese stayed put there. And there's a different story about India and China and Sikkim that you alluded to, which happened. But the Chinese were certainly, the Chinese, if you've noticed and observed over the years, the Chinese would never unleash their plans unless they're very sure about going through with it. So they had their plans of taking Gangtok, which they did not go through because the Pakistanis hadn't advanced. Now what happened was that when the Pakistanis were pushed back, the Chinese complained, and they started with a very frivolous complaint. And this happened somewhere in August that, look, India has stolen 800 sheep and 59 yaks. And so this is a very interesting incident there, that in Delhi, a 42-year-old politician led a whole bunch of sheep and yaks to the Chinese consulate, holding a placard saying, "Eat us, but don't go to war." And that 42-year-old politician was Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So this happened, interesting aside there. So this was happening with China. There was this little pull and push that was going on, and the Chinese had accused India of transgressing the boundary, Sikkim border, and they said that India had built bunkers, which was not true, and the Chinese had issued an ultimatum as well to India. On the 18th of September and the 20th of September, we said that, we had run out of, and that's another subject to discuss, that we had run out of ammunition. There was a feedback which was wrong. We had much more than what we had declared. The thing is, on the 7th of September, when they were on the back foot, Ayub Khan and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto fly to China. And they land in Beijing. They meet Zhou Enlai and Marshal Fenghi. And so they said, look, help us. To your point, why didn't China interfere? They said, help us, do something, because we are on the back foot now. The Chinese told the Pakistani premiers then, be ready to lose your cities. Be ready to lose your cities and be ready to fight a war of attrition. Here was Ayub thinking of a short, quick war. We were talking about the cultural proclivity to have a quick war, both India and Pakistan. And the Chinese were used to fighting long wars. Be ready to lose your cities because they said, the Indian, the India as a country, as a people, do not have the appetite to sustain a long war. And that's where there was a point of difference. But the Chinese did pressurize India, and we don't know if that pressure really worked, because on the 20th of September, we went to the UN, and lo and behold, on the 22nd of September, the UN agreed. And of course, there's this whole idea about the ammunition, which we said that we had run out of ammunition, but we were actually, we had 80% stocks, and Pakistanis at 15% stocks, and we had a miscalculation like all else in the war. We had our intelligence, our understanding of Pakistan's intent and capability was dismal, right from the start to finish. That was a takeaway I would think that we needed to ponder on.
Absolutely, and Prabal, when you're talking about sheep and goats, I was thinking of another animal, four-legged animal, a cow. As you know, the Pakistanis had shelled Porbandar, Dwarka, of Dwarka.
Yes.
8th of September 1965, that's Pakistan Naval Day. So someone in the Navy said that, all they did with that shelling was they just killed a cow. They didn't kill anyone, they didn't cause any damage. So someone else in the Navy said, well, then let's build a memorial to that cow, because she at least died with her hooves on. And so there was a lot of anger in the Navy, because the Navy was not allowed to participate in the 65 war, despite having a very, very important warship there. It's one of the best warships, INS Talwar, as you know, was deployed in Gujarat at that time. But, I mean, this is the thing about moving on from the animal stories to, Uttam, you were talking a while earlier about the personalities, and when you read the histories of 1965, when you listen to anecdotes like Bedi sir has just told us, it was all about personalities, right? It's Ayub Khan, this larger-than-life guy who thinks he's God's answer to Pakistan's problems, Field Marshal, the first Field Marshal, self-appointed, of course. And then you have Lal Bahadur Shastri, diminutive man. There's a 1 foot height difference between the two of them, 5 feet 2 inches and 6 feet 2 inches. And then you have, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the scheming, the conniving guy in the back room. And of course, you have a whole lot of other wannabe dictators in different stages of evolution in Pakistan, right? You have, Munir was born in what, 66? So Zia was already in service, Musharraf was an artillery major, who else was there? How many other dictators are there? But 2 or 3 of them after that. Well, so Yahya Khan was the next one, of course, he was already on his staff, on the Field Marshal staff. So lots of interesting personalities there. You think this war was launched based on faulty intelligence assessments that by the Pakistanis, that, the Indians, they're confused, they're defeated, 62, this is our opportunity, and therefore they moved in. And Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, interesting guy, he hides his strength, bides his time, waits till not just Ayub Khan, but Yahya Khan is defeated in 71, and then he moves in. And he assumes center stage. You think that's what really happened here?
I think I would largely agree with that. But before I come back to that, it's interesting, while we discuss the 1965 war, and it is India and Pakistan war, the elephant in the room is China. But I think, yes, looking at the actors, the person, the persona, is important in 65, especially when we evaluate Pakistan in particular. You have these, dictators, generals who sort of come and set the whole relationship. They're ambitious, they want to do certain things, that they live in memory. And I remember a Dawn editorial in 2016, says that, that the Pakistanis are very forgiving people. They forgive the dead. And that includes the dictators and the rabble-rousers, etc., who end up having disciples and followers. So it's interesting how you look at the Pakistanis' establishment. And yes, Ayub, there is another element. You're talking about this civilizational war, but if you study the rank and file of the army, the Pakistani army, it's interesting because Major General Akbar Malik, who was commanding the div, and he was doing a fantastic job, as he was immediately removed at a certain point of time where the advantage was lying with Pakistan, and Yahya Khan was brought into the picture. And the only reason probably he was removed was he was a Ahmadiyya, right? And Yahya Khan was a Shia Pathan, just like General Musa was. Of course, Ayub was a Sunni Pathan. So this dynamics within the Pakistani army hierarchy is also very interesting to note. I think Ayub was ambitious. I think he felt that the Americans were in his side. I remember his meeting with Kennedy, and Jacqueline Kennedy hosts a very wonderful dinner. She curates a very wonderful dinner when Ayub is meeting Kennedy, and he's telling, I want Nehru out of my radar screen. I want Kashmir. That was his entire agenda of meeting Kennedy. He also stopped, he was trying to stop Nehru coming and meeting in the following month. Kennedy. So, these elements were very much in Ayub's mind, I think, and it is something that we must note in Pakistan, because if this was Ayub's war, then you had Kargil as Musharraf's war, and probably you have the current situation as Munir's war. So, these personalities in Pakistan will drive a wedge between India and Pakistan, and we must track them and monitor them and be prepared for it, I think. But I think it's a great, if you look at Ayub's approach and you had Shastri's approach, and you had this wonderful book, The Great Conciliator, that Shastri was. Remember Shastri, met Ayub in Rawalpindi. And it's an interesting conversation that they have. Shastri is a man of peace. He goes and attends the NAM summit in Cairo in October 1964, right? Soon after he becomes the prime minister. And on his way back, he stops at Rawalpindi and meets Ayub, and he describes it as a positive beginning, right? So while his international outlook is a man of peace, searching for peaceful coexistence and economic development, but Shastri during the time of war is a completely different man. And I think this contrast is very fascinating to study leadership and how they bring in a sort of national unity, how they're bringing a certain moral factor into the whole understanding of what war is. And there are some wonderful anecdotes about Nehru, I think, which needs to be brought forth. And I think the contrast between Shastri as a man of peace and Shastri as a leader during wartime is almost something like Churchillian, I would say. It's remarkable how he brings this element of national unity, drive forces in the parliament, gets everyone on his side to talk about protecting India's national sovereignty. Yes, I think that's very important to look at actors, personalities, and personas who define history, who define important moments in time, I think.
Thank you very much, Uttam. And unfortunately, we're completely out of time here, but I want to thank our distinguished panelists for giving us this very great overview of 1965. And when you were talking about Ayub, I could just imagine myself putting in Munir at every little sentence that you were mentioning there, because as they say, history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And with the case of Pakistan and its military dictators, they never cease to disappoint you. It's always a dictator who has his grand plans for Pakistan, and of course his plans for strategic parity with India or dominate India in warfare. But thank you very much, my esteemed panelists, for this fascinating oversight of the echoes of 1965, why we feel it even today, 60 years later in 2025. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandeep sir, and all our panelists. It was an honor listening to all of you. May I please request Shishir sir and General Pannu to please come on stage to felicitate the guests. May we please have the mementos on stage, please?